Imagine you are a battlefield commander. You are staring at this high-resolution display in your command center.
Right, the classic modern war room setup.
Exactly. And your screen shows an enemy armored convoy. It is approaching a critical, highly populated bridge.
High stakes right from the jump.
Oh, absolutely. And the satellite video feed you are looking at is perfectly crisp. I mean, it's night, but the thermal imaging shows the heat signatures of the engines.
So it looks completely undeniable.
Totally undeniable. Your newly integrated AI logistics and targeting assistant, it instantly calculates the exact strike coordinates. It factors in the wind speed, predicts the blast radius to minimize civilian casualties, and flags the optimal munition.
It's doing all the heavy cognitive lifting.
Right. The math is perfect. It looks absolutely flawless. Literally, all you have to do is authorize the strike.
Just push the button.
Just push the button. But here's the terrifying reality. That video feed, it isn't real.
Yeah, and this is where it gets scary.
It is a deepfake, generated for about 12 cents by an adversarial algorithm. The heat signatures are synthetic. The bridge is completely empty.
Wow.
And your AI assistant, this machine you've come to trust with your life, has been subtly poisoned. Just one invisible line of code inserted into its training data maybe 3 years ago, specifically designed to make it confirm this exact type of hallucination.
A sleeper agent in the code.
Exactly. So if you issue that order, you don't just blow up an empty bridge, you trigger a massive geopolitical escalation over a ghost. You start a war over a mathematical illusion.
And welcome to the cognitive battle space.
Yeah, welcome to the nightmare.
It really is the ultimate nightmare scenario for any military leader today. I mean, the terrain isn't just physical anymore. It's not just hills and valleys. The terrain is the human mind's actual ability to perceive reality.
And in that environment, the old maps are just, well, they're entirely useless.
Completely useless.
And that brings us to exactly why we are here today. Welcome to today's deep dive. It is Sunday, March 29, 2026. And to our resident learner listening right now, welcome.
Glad you could join us.
We know you are here because you want to get to the absolute core of a really complex topic. You want to understand the mechanics of the future, and you want it quickly but thoroughly without drowning in all the usual noise.
And the stakes for today's topic literally could not be higher.
No, they really couldn't. The source material we have stacked on the desk today is this newly synthesized massive defense framework. It is titled AI-Assisted Professional Military Education, a framework for educational transformation in the agentic AI era.
Which I know is quite a mouthful.
It is. On the surface, it sounds like this incredibly dense, bureaucratic military jargon, just alphabet soup.
But when you actually read the pages...
Right, when you get into it, it is a deeply philosophical and incredibly practical blueprint. I mean, it is basically a survival guide for the human mind.
It really is. The military has officially realized that artificial intelligence is no longer some, sci-fi future state.
It's the water they're swimming in right now.
Exactly. So the mission today is to discover how the military plans to completely rebuild how it trains its leaders.
Because the ultimate goal outlined in these documents, it isn't about achieving technological dominance. Buying the biggest, fastest computer it doesn't win the war anymore.
No, it doesn't. The goal is something the authors call decision superiority.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core premise here is that we have to figure out how to teach a human being to use AI to carry the crushing burden of the work.
Right, the data processing, the math.
Yeah, the burden. But doing that without the human ever surrendering the moral and strategic responsibility of command.
And that is an incredibly fine line to walk. I mean, the military is really trying to thread the needle here.
So to understand how they want to rebuild this entire educational architecture, we really have to look at how the actual environment of war has completely inverted.
Yeah, the literal battlefield has flipped.
Right, because if we think about historical military operations, World War II, the Cold War, even the early 2000s, the defining characteristic of the information environment was scarcity.
It was always about what you didn't know.
Exactly. If you were a commander, your biggest problem was that you didn't know what was happening over the next hill. You were fighting the literal fog of war. You're sending out scouts, flying reconnaissance planes, just desperately trying to find a needle in a haystack.
And that scarcity forced a very specific type of decision-making.
How do you mean?
Well, you had to make massive extrapolations based on tiny, tiny fragments of data. You had to trust your gut a lot more.
Right. But today, because of the massive proliferation of drones, commercial satellites, open source intelligence on social media, network sensors everywhere. That problem has completely flipped.
We are absolutely no longer dealing with information scarcity.
No, we are dealing with catastrophic data overabundance.
Yeah. There are too many needles, and the haystack is literally collapsing on top of you.
I love that visual. And that fundamentally changes what an adversary targets, doesn't it?
It has to.
Because if I am fighting you, and I know I can't hide my tanks from your satellites anymore, because you literally have eyes in space watching my every move, I don't even try to hide the tanks.
Right. What's the point?
Exactly. Instead, I attack your ability to understand what you are looking at. I target your perception, your trust, and your actual decision-making process. This is the cognitive battle space we were talking about.
What's fascinating here is that cognitive warfare is essentially a contest over reality itself.
Over reality itself. Wow.
Yeah. It's not about destroying physical forces anymore. It's about hacking the human interpretive engine.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on the novelty of this just a bit.
Sure.
Hasn't deception always been a massive part of warfare? I'm thinking of Operation Fortitude in World War II.
Oh, the Ghost Army.
Yes, the Ghost Army, where the Allies built literal inflatable tanks and generated fake radio traffic to trick the Germans about where the D-Day landings would happen.
A classic example.
Right. We've dropped propaganda leaflets. We've hijacked radio signals. Deception is as old as the Trojan horse. So what makes this new cognitive battle space structurally different from what, Eisenhower faced?
It's a great question. The difference is the sheer asymmetry of modern cognitive conflict, specifically regarding scale and cost.
Okay, break that down for me.
Think about that Ghost Army. Building inflatable tanks, moving them around in the dark, generating fake coordinated radio traffic. That took a massive logistical effort.
It took thousands of people.
Thousands of troops, months and months of planning, vast resources. It was incredibly expensive, it was slow, and it was highly localized to one specific geographic area.
Right. It was a physical illusion constrained by physical geography.
Exactly. But today, AI acts as this unprecedented accelerator. It is virtually free for an adversary to use generative AI to create synthetic media.
We're talking pennies.
Pennies. We are talking about deepfakes, coordinated bot swarms, hyper-personalized narratives. An algorithm can literally scrape the social media profiles of a specific brigade of soldiers, analyze their individual psychological vulnerabilities, and generate 1,000 different perfectly tailored lies.
Like what? What kind of lies?
Say, fake news reports about their specific hometowns being attacked back in the States.
Oh, wow.
And it can deploy all of those tailored lies to their phones in seconds.
That is horrifying. And the cost to do that is, like you said, near zero.
Near zero to attack. But countering it...
That's the asymmetry.
Yes. If an adversary releases a highly convincing synthetic video of a general ordering an illegal strike, the target institution, the military, has to spend vast amounts of time, human capital, and institutional credibility to forensically analyze that video.
Just to prove it's fake.
Just to prove it's fake and then try to communicate the truth to a public that has already moved on. And the truly terrifying part is, the adversary doesn't even need you to believe the lie.
They don't.
No, they just need you to doubt the truth.
They are engineering decision paralysis.
That makes total sense. They are just flooding the zone with garbage so that you freeze.
Exactly.
And that completely compresses the time leaders have to respond. If that fake video goes viral on social media, you don't have 3 days to convene a committee and draft a nice press release.
You have maybe 3 minutes?
3 minutes before it impacts coalition trust or troop morale on the ground. It's happening at the speed of light. And the lines are totally blurred now. A military commander sitting in a highly secure command post is looking at the exact same toxic, manipulated social media ecosystem on their phone that a civilian is looking at on her couch.
And that compression of time, that is the actual mechanism of defeat.
How so?
If an adversary can force you to react at the speed of an algorithm, you lose the reflective space required for strategic, logical judgment.
You just become reactive.
You become reactive, you become emotionally triggered. You are no longer commanding the situation, the algorithm is commanding you. Which is exactly why you, the listener, need to care about this right now. Because this exact dynamic, this compression of decision time, the weaponization of information, the overwhelming flood of data causing you to freeze up, is not just confined to some military tent in a war zone.
No, it's everywhere.
It is happening in every corporate boardroom when a sudden PR crisis hits Twitter. It's happening in our financial markets with rapid algorithmic trading.
Absolutely.
It's happening in your own social media feed
Yeah.
when you are just trying to figure out what is actually true during an election cycle. The military is just dealing with the absolute extreme, lethal end of a spectrum that we are all currently living on.
That's exactly right. And because the battlefield has fundamentally shifted to this cognitive domain, the legacy systems that were built to train people for the old world, the world of physical geography and scarce information, they are dangerously out of date.
This connects directly to a brilliant, almost tragic concept the text introduces regarding the current state of affairs. They call it the dual underutilization crisis.
Yes, that is a core pillar of this framework.
And it really perfectly frames the dysfunction we are experiencing right now in this weird transition period we're in.
It does. It describes a paralyzing contradiction in how we are currently working. On one side of this crisis, human beings, highly trained, brilliant military officers, are wildly underutilized.
Because they're doing busy work.
Exactly. They are wasting their incredibly scarce cognitive bandwidth on low-level clerical work.
Right. I picture a lieutenant who, went to a top-tier academy, studied complex international relations and grand military strategy, and currently they're sitting in some windowless room, manually copying data from one Excel spreadsheet to another.
Reformatting daily intelligence reports.
Tweaking fonts on a massive PowerPoint deck for a general's briefing. It is just a tragic waste of human cognitive potential.
It really is. And on the other side of the crisis, the machines, these incredible generative AI models that are perfectly capable of doing that exact low-level clerical work in about 3 seconds, they're also being underutilized.
Just bureaucracy.
Fear, mostly. The institutions are terrified of them. They haven't established governance, they don't understand the cybersecurity risks, or they just issue blanket bans out of sheer panic.
Right. No AI on government computers.
Exactly. So you have these brilliant human minds acting like basic calculators and actual supercomputers sitting in the corner unplugged.
It is the ultimate bottleneck. And the framework argues that this dysfunction is actually perpetuated by the educational model itself. Like, we are still suffering from this massive industrial age hangover in professional military education, or PME as they call it.
It was built for an era where information updated very slowly.
Yeah, it's basically a factory assembly line model.
It is entirely passive. I mean, the traditional model places the instructor at the front of the room as this sole gatekeeper of scarce knowledge.
Right.
They deliver a static lecture, say, a detailed historical breakdown of the Battle of Gettysburg. The student passively receives this information, takes notes, and then the assessment is a written essay designed just to test their recall.
But memorizing troop movements from 1863, while, historically interesting, does absolutely nothing to prepare a human brain to process a real-time adversarial data flood where the information itself is actively trying to deceive you.
Exactly. It's a completely different skill set.
If I am trained my whole career to just sit quietly and accept whatever the expert at the front of the room tells me, I am going to get slaughtered in a cognitive battle space.
You be a sitting duck.
I'm going to look at that deepfake AI targeting screen we talked about earlier, and because the screen looks authoritative and crisp, I'll just blindly accept it.
Precisely. A static case study simply cannot replicate the live, ambiguous flux of a modern command center. So, to survive this, the framework argues the military must pivot its entire educational foundation to something called character science.
Okay, I have to push back here.
Go for it.
Character science. That sounds incredibly soft.
Does sound like buzzword PF.
Yeah. It sounds like one of those motivational posters in a corporate HR office about synergy and integrity. When I think of military combat power, I think of F-35 fighter jets, hypersonic missiles, robust logistical supply chains. How on earth does character equate to actual combat power?
I get that reaction a lot. It requires a complete paradigm shift in how we define power. In an AI-mediated world, character is not just about personal morality. It's not about being a polite, ethical person who doesn't lie.
Okay, then what is it?
It is a hard operational necessity. And to understand why, we really have to look at the mechanics of something called automation bias.
Right, automation bias. My understanding is that this is the human psychological tendency to trust a machine's output over our own judgment, simply because the machine's output looks polished, confident, and mathematical.
Exactly.
If a computer spits out a beautifully formatted spreadsheet, our brains naturally just assume the math must be flawless.
We defer to the aesthetic of precision.
The aesthetic of precision, I like that.
Now, imagine that bias operating on a strategic, highly lethal scale. An officer has been awake for 48 hours.
They're exhausted.
Exhausted. They are under extreme time pressure. The data pouring in from the field is highly conflicting. Then, a sophisticated AI system synthesizes all this chaotic data and offers a single, neat, highly coherent course of action.
It looks brilliant. It solves the immediate stress.
Yes. An officer lacking deep intellectual courage might simply defer to that flawed AI system just because it's faster and it completely relieves their cognitive burden.
They use the machine as a shield against responsibility.
Yes. The algorithm told me to do it. The computer calculated the optimal route, so it's not my fault if it goes wrong. They abdicate their command. An officer without moral courage will always defer to procedural convenience rather than doing the excruciating, exhausting work of exercising independent, skeptical judgment.
Ah, I see. Okay, so character science isn't about teaching people to be nice.
Not at all.
It is the structured, rigorous cultivation of what the text calls epistemic discipline.
That's the key term.
It is literally training the brain to tolerate high levels of uncertainty, to maintain psychological composure when the data is screaming at you, and most importantly, to aggressively and systematically question fluent, confident AI outputs.
It elevates intellectual honesty from a nice-to-have virtue to a mission-critical combat requirement.
If the machine can fake reality flawlessly, the only remaining defense system is a human mind that possesses the character to refuse to take reality at face value. Character is the firewall.
Character is the firewall. I couldn't have said it better.
But, if we were relying on human character and skepticism to keep AI in check, we can't just throw a human and a supercomputer into a command tent and say, good luck, try not to trust it too much.
No, that would just be pure chaos.
Right. We need a structural system. We need to know exactly where the machine's authority ends and the human's responsibility begins.
And this brings us to the holy grail of the entire framework: optimal human-machine task allocation.
Okay, because the text is totally adamant that we have to abandon the fallacy of maximal automation. Just because we can automate a task with AI doesn't mean we should. We have to move toward optimal allocation. So how does the military plan to actually categorize these tasks?
The framework breaks this down into a 3-tier model for functional differentiation. The entire goal here is to improve performance without degrading human resilience or accountability.
Okay, what's the first tier?
The first tier is machine suitable.
Okay, what defines a task as machine suitable?
These are tasks that are highly structured, highly repetitive, large-scale, and computationally intensive. And crucially, they do not carry high ethical ambiguity or require nuanced, sovereign human judgment.
So an example would be if I have 10,000 pages of intercepted enemy radio transcripts, and I need to find every single time a specific geographical coordinate is mentioned.
That is perfectly machine suitable.
Or calculating the exact fuel consumption rate for a convoy of 50 trucks traveling over 3 different mountainous routes with varying elevations. Machine suitable.
Exactly. The machine does the heavy lifting, and the human simply reviews the output periodically for weird anomalies.
Makes sense.
But the second tier is where things get really complicated. This is the jointly supervised tier.
How does this work mechanically? Like, who is actually leading here?
In this category, the AI acts as a high-level generator, or a cognitive accelerator. The AI might propose a plan, compare multiple massive data sets, or draft a really complex staff estimate. But the human must actively verify, rigorously refine, and ultimately approve that output.
So the AI proposes, the human disposes.
Exactly.
So this would be like asking the AI to look at the map and generate 3 entirely different logistical options for resupplying a forward operating base, complete with risk assessments for each route. The AI generates the options, but it cannot authorize them.
Yes, and that final authorization belongs exclusively to the third tier, human-led tasks.
And these are the big ones.
These are tasks that are deeply contextual, ethically sensitive, legally binding, and bear ultimate operational responsibility.
So defining the commander's actual nuanced intent for a mission.
Yes.
Accepting the lethal operational risk of a specific operation. Making a binding legal judgment on the rules of engagement in a highly populated urban area.
Exactly. The AI might provide background data for those decisions, like the weather forecast or the enemy troop density, but the sovereign judgment remains unmistakably entirely human.
Let me try to build an analogy here to see if I am grasping the mechanics of this integration, especially that really tricky middle tier.
Let's hear it.
Let's think about a high-end 3 Michelin star restaurant kitchen.
I like where this is going.
So the AI is the sous chef. And it is a superhuman sous chef. It can perfectly brunoise 100 onions in 3 seconds flat. It can instantly calculate exactly how much inventory is in the walk-in fridge.
Okay, so that is your machine-suitable tier. It saves the kitchen hours of mundane prep time.
Right. Then we move to the jointly supervised tier. The AI sous chef might analyze all the seasonal ingredients that just arrived from the farm that morning and say, "Chef, based on the flavor profiles and historical customer preferences, I recommend pairing this venison with a reduction of dark cherry and sage."
The AI proposes a highly complex synthesis.
Exactly. But the chef still has to taste the reduction. They have to adjust the acidity, check the balance, and ultimately agree that it works.
Right.
But the head chef, the human, is the only one standing at the pass during actual dinner service. They wipe the rim of the plate. They look at the entire composition. They decide if that specific dish reflects the philosophical standard of the restaurant and is actually good enough to go out to the dining room.
Because if a customer gets food poisoning.
Exactly. If someone gets sick, or if the restaurant loses its Michelin star, the health inspector and the food critics don't blame the food processor or the smart oven. The human head chef bears the ultimate untransferable responsibility. That's the human-led tier.
That is a phenomenal analogy because it highlights exactly where the massive danger lies in this new system.
Where's the danger?
What the military framework points out is that the vast majority of future operations will occur in that middle tier, jointly supervised cognition. The AI is going to be constantly proposing, drafting, and summarizing all day long,
Right.
which means the very definition of supervision is fundamentally changing. It is no longer just a management task of making sure your human subordinates show up to work on time and have polished boots. Supervising machine cognition becomes a core daily professional skill.
But let's push that kitchen analogy just a little bit further because I think it reveals a really fatal flaw in human psychology.
Okay, let's push it.
If the AI sous chef flawlessly chops 10,000 onions perfectly every single day for a solid year, the human head chef is eventually going to stop checking the onions.
It's inevitable.
Human nature dictates that we conserve energy. We get lazy. We trust the pattern. So, on day 366, when the AI sous chef accidentally chops up a highly poisonous mushroom and mixes it into the onions, the head chef just scoops it up and serves it. They stop supervising because the machine was simply too reliable.
And there we are right back at automation bias. The reliability of the machine actually creates a lethal human vulnerability.
Which leads us into a massive, massive problem. Supervising a genius AI sous chef is incredibly difficult if you don't actually know how it learned to cook in the first place.
Right. If it hands you a beautiful plate of food, but you can't tell if it used salt or arsenic, you are flying totally blind.
This introduces profound systemic risks to the entire command structure. It is the danger of the black box. And the sources use a phrase here that legitimately stopped me in my tracks when I read it.
Oh, I know the one.
The programmer's invisible hand.
Yes, it's chilling.
It really is. The idea that hidden design assumptions, the vast, messy training data scraped from the open internet years ago, these specific mathematical thresholds set in the model architecture by some random tech company in Silicon Valley. All of these invisible choices secretly shape the lethal military decisions being made in a Command 10 today.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is exactly why the phrase human in the loop is often just a dangerous illusion of safety.
How so? Politicians say that all the time.
Politicians and generals love to say, don't worry, there will always be a human in the loop. But if the human doesn't actually understand how the algorithmic black box generated its output, their presence in that loop is entirely useless.
They're just a rubber stamp.
Merely sitting at a desk and clicking approve on a beautifully rendered targeting screen does not equate to exercising judgment. It is just laundering the machine's hidden biases through a human finger.
Wow. Laundering the machine's decision. That is incredibly dark, but entirely accurate. Because if an algorithm says there is an 80% chance this convoy is hostile, and the officer just clicks yes, the officer hasn't made a decision at all.
They've just absorbed the programmer's invisible hand.
Right. Say the original training data had a hidden geographical bias, or it underestimated the speed of a certain vehicle because of a flawed physics model coded in 2022. The human officer has absolutely no way of knowing that. They are inheriting assumptions they never agreed to.
So the framework insists that to break open this black box, we must legally mandate explainability and traceability.
What does that look like in practice?
An AI workflow must be fully auditable. A A camera must be able to ask the system why it suggested a specific route or identified a specific target, and the system must be able to logically trace its evidentiary chain back to its foundational source.
They literally need to see the cognitive math.
Yeah.
If you can't trace the logic, you cannot trust the output.
Exactly. The framework states explicitly, if the answer to the question, can the chain of contribution be reconstructed, is no, then that specific AI workflow is simply too opaque for high-consequence military use. It must be completely rejected.
But here's the rub. To build an officer corps capable of demanding this high-level traceability, an officer corps with the technical knowledge to actually audit an algorithm and the epistemic discipline to reject a perfectly formatted but opaque AI plan, you can't just send them to a mandatory 2-hour online seminar on a Friday afternoon.
No, click-through training won't fix this.
The entire educational pipeline has to be demolished and rebuilt from the foundation up.
And the framework proposes a highly structured approach to this demolition and rebuild. They outline a 3-tiered AI readiness framework.
Okay, let's get into the tiers.
Because it is important to note, they aren't suggesting every single infantry soldier needs a PhD in computer science.
Right, that would be impossible.
But everyone needs literacy appropriate to their rank, their role, and their blast radius.
Let's walk through the mechanics of these 3 educational tiers. What are we actually teaching them?
Tier S is foundational AI literacy. This is the absolute baseline for everyone, starting the day they were commissioned. It covers the core conceptual architecture.
So, like, what generative AI actually is mechanically?
Yes. The fundamental difference between statistical decision support and actual human judgment. And critically, they learn the failure modes.
Right, so they have to learn exactly how and why models hallucinate. They have to understand the extreme brittleness of algorithms when presented with novel edge cases that weren't in their training data.
And they learn basic prompt discipline. The goal here is just to prevent naive, dangerous use of the tools. Nobody gets to touch the system blindly.
Makes total sense.
Once they have that baseline, planners, mid-career officers, and staff members move to Tier 2, operational competence. This is where theory hits practice. They move beyond basic literacy into actual workflow integration.
How does that look in a classroom setting?
They learn how to take a massive, complex staff, task like planning a theater-wide brigade movement, and actively decompose it into machine-suitable parts and human-led parts.
Oh, so they practice assigning the tasks.
They practice designing the actual workflows. And they run simulations where the AI is deliberately poisoned by the instructors, forcing them to actively practice mitigating automation bias in real time.
This is where they learn the hard discipline of being that head chef managing the jointly supervised tier.
Exactly. And then we reach the top of the pyramid. Tier 3, strategic leadership. This is for the generals, the senior civilian leaders, the people steering the entire enterprise.
What do they learn? I assume they aren't coding.
No, these leaders don't necessarily need to know how to write a Python script to pull data. They need to understand the macro forces, governance, massive acquisition strategies, evaluating enterprise-level institutional risk.
A big picture.
They need to understand how deploying a fully autonomous system intersects with international humanitarian law and ethics.
That is a really crucial point. Because if a machine-generated plan results in civilian casualties, the Tier 3 leader is the one answering to the international courts.
They bear the ultimate responsibility.
So they have to be able to evaluate incredibly complex vendor claims, so they don't just buy millions of dollars of snake oil from a slick tech company promising magic solutions.
Precisely. And implementing this 3-tiered system fundamentally breaks the old model of the educator, too.
Right, we talked earlier about the passive lecturer at the front of the room.
The framework explicitly states that the identity of the military educator must evolve from a lecturer to a learning coach.
Because if information is no longer scarce, if an AI can instantly generate a perfectly accurate historical summary of any battle in human history in 5 seconds, the teacher's value is no longer in delivering facts.
Facts are cheap now.
The teacher's value is in guiding the student's questioning process. It's in exposing the student's hidden biases and assumptions and structuring really complex comparative analysis. The educator essentially becomes a reasoning coach.
They are teaching the student how to think about the machine's output, not what to think about the historical subject matter.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Every time you bring AI into any educational setting, whether it's an elementary school or the Army War College, the immediate Existential panic from the faculty is always about cheating.
Always.
The students are just going to use ChatGPT to write their grand strategy essays, and they will learn absolutely nothing.
It's a valid fear.
It is. And the framework proposes what it calls a middle way approach to academic integrity to solve this.
It is a very pragmatic philosophy. The two extreme responses are both guaranteed failures.
What are the extremes?
Well, banning AI entirely from the academy is practically impossible, and worse, it leaves students totally unprepared for the reality of the command center they are about to step into.
Right, you can't pretend the tech doesn't exist.
But on the other extreme, accepting AI uncritically means you graduate officers who have completely atrophied cognitive muscles and can't think for themselves when the power goes out. So the middle way requires deliberate friction.
Okay, so instead of focusing on grading the final polished essay, which an AI can write perfectly in 10 seconds, the military will institute AI-free checkpoints. Walk me through the mechanics of an AI-free checkpoint. What does that actually look like for a student on a Tuesday?
Imagine a student is tasked with developing a massive theater-level logistical strategy. Under the middle way, they are fully encouraged to use AI agents to help synthesize vast amounts of historical research, run complex statistical models, and even draft the initial structure of their massive paper.
They use the machine to carry the burden of the data processing.
Yes.
So they use the AI sous chef to prep all the ingredients.
Exactly. But to pass the course, they have to step into a room with a panel of veteran instructors. There are no computers allowed in this room, just the student, a blank whiteboard, and a dry erase marker.
Oh, I love this.
This is the AI-free checkpoint. They have to orally defend their logic. They have to diagram their complex source chains entirely from memory.
And the instructors push back.
Oh, the instructors will throw massive curveballs. What if this specific northern supply route is suddenly cut off by weather? How does that impact your secondary assumptions? The student has to justify exactly why they accepted the AI's recommendation for Route A and why they explicitly rejected Route B.
I love the visceral reality of that. It is entirely about proving how you thought about the problem. You have to make your reasoning completely visible on that whiteboard.
You can't hide behind a polished essay.
Because if the AI did all the cognitive math for you and you just blindly copied it, you will completely freeze when the instructor removes the tech and changes one variable. You will fail the oral defense spectacularly.
It shifts the entire assessment model from did you get the right answer to can you demonstrate the cognitive resilience and epistemic discipline required to generate and defend this answer under pressure.
Which obviously requires a massive investment in the faculty itself. You can't expect a professor who has spent 20 years comfortably grading written essays to suddenly become a master interrogator of human-machine workflows without giving them serious time, training, and resources.
Exactly. The teachers have to deeply learn the new system before they can even begin to coach the students through it.
Okay, so let's imagine we've successfully educated this new generation of officers. They've passed their grueling whiteboard defenses. They deeply understand automation bias and optimal task allocation. Now they graduate and deploy to a real-world command center. A real crisis kicks off. How does this philosophical training actually change the mechanical way they plan a mission?
It fundamentally alters the absolute centerpiece of military operations, the military decision-making process, or MDMP.
How does MDMP work traditionally?
Historically, MDMP is a very strict, highly linear and sequential methodology. You receive the mission, you frame the problem, you develop a single course of action, you analyze it, you compare it against maybe one other option, and finally the commander makes a decision.
It sounds incredibly slow. I'm picturing a bunch of exhausted staff officers locked in a hot tent for 3 days, drinking terrible coffee, moving physical acetate overlays around on a giant paper map.
It is notoriously grueling and incredibly time-consuming. But with the integration of AI, MDMP shifts from a slow, linear sequence to a highly rapid, highly iterative process.
Because of the processing speed.
Right. AI can instantly synthesize volumes of incoming intelligence, data-changing weather patterns, live satellite imagery, intercepted enemy communications, and generate multiple courses of action, or COAs, simultaneously.
So instead of a team of humans taking 12 hours to exhaustively build out one single viable plan, the AI-assisted hands commander 5 different fully fleshed out plans in 20 minutes.
Precisely. And this is where the speed advantage becomes massive on the battlefield. It allows for continuous, rapid wargaming.
Wargaming in real time.
Yes. You can take those 5 AI-generated plans and start wildly changing variables. What if a massive storm rolls in tomorrow? What if the enemy destroys the primary bridge we plan to use? The AI instantly models exactly how those new variables cascade through all 5 courses of action.
It allows the human planners to explore a vastly larger, much more complex solution space than a human brain could ever map out on a whiteboard.
Exactly.
But I have to stop and ask a very pragmatic, slightly cynical question here.
Please do.
All of this technology, the massive, energy-hungry server farms required to run these models, the continuous real-time data feeds from hundreds of satellites, the constant software updates to keep the AI from degrading, it sounds astronomically expensive to build and even more expensive to maintain over a decade.
It is.
We're talking about billions and billions of dollars. What is the catch? Because there is always a catch with defense tech.
The catch is the long tail of institutional dependence. And this is exactly why the framework insists that we cannot just teach officers how to use the tech. We must aggressively integrate management science and defense economics into PME.
Officers have to understand the business of AI.
Yes. It's not just about deploying cool tech in the field. It's about the taxpayers actually being able to afford to keep the servers turned on 5 years from now.
The military must be trained to look at life cycle costing.
Exactly. Generative AI systems are notorious for looking incredibly attractive in a short-term, tightly controlled pilot program.
Right. A tech vendor brings in a shiny, beautiful interface, runs it on perfectly clean data, and it looks like absolute magic to the generals.
But the long-term hidden burdens are massive. You have the constant grinding cost of data curation. You have continuous model maintenance to prevent drift, where the AI slowly becomes less accurate over time as the world changes.
Oh, model drift.
You have severe, infinitely escalating cybersecurity requirements. And you have the constant need to retrain the entire human workforce every single time the system updates its interface.
So if you don't teach these future generals to think like economists, they're going to go out and buy a fleet of digital hypercars because they look amazing on the showroom floor.
And then 5 years later, they'll realize they live on a dirt road, they can't afford the specialized jet fuel the cars require, and they don't have any mechanics who know how to fix the engines.
That is a perfect analogy for what the authors of the framework call procurement theater. It is the illusion of modernization. PME must teach officers to structure complex problems so rigorously that they can see right through the slick vendor hype.
They need to be able to ask the hard, boring questions. Is this specific AI capability actually supportable, secure, and worthwhile over a 10-year operational lifespan?
But to ensure these systems are actually worth that massive financial investment, and more importantly, to ensure they don't lead those human planners completely astray in a life-or-death wargaming scenario. The underlying technology has to be anchored.
It has to be.
It has to be rooted in absolute verifiable truth. You cannot wargame a nuclear response based on an AI hallucination.
This is the critical technical hurdle of the entire endeavor. We are moving far past the era of a single, simple chatbot sitting on a desktop computer. The future military classroom and the future command center are described in the framework as a multi-agent ecosystem.
I am having a little trouble visualizing this. Walk me through the mechanics of a multi-agent room. What does it actually look like to work inside one?
Imagine you are a human planner sitting at a command console. You aren't just prompting one omniscient AI like you do on your phone. You are interacting with a network of specialized, distinct AI agents, each with a very specific role and almost a distinct personality. One AI agent acts as a dedicated adversary simulator, a red team agent. Its entire programmatic goal is to constantly try to poke holes in your plan, aggressively questioning your assumptions.
Playing devil's advocate.
Exactly. Another agent acts as an intelligent tutor. It quietly monitors your workflow, and if it senses you are struggling to apply a specific doctrinal concept, it interrupts and offers a micro-learning module right there on the screen.
Wow.
A third agent acts as an evaluator or a compliance officer, constantly checking your proposed actions against the incredibly complex rules of engagement and international law.
That sounds incredible. It's like having a team of genius-level staff officers looking over your shoulder 204/7.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like a recipe for a psychological breakdown if one of those agents starts making things up.
Yes.
If my evaluator agent suddenly hallucinates a fake legal precedent and tells me a missile strike is legal when it actually isn't, I am going to international prison. This brings us right back to the hallucination problem.
The biggest flaw in generative AI.
In a creative writing class, an AI inventing a fake quote is a funny mistake. In military doctrine, an AI inventing a fictional payload capacity for a cargo plane or hallucinating a fake protocol for handling hazardous materials is a literal matter of life and death.
It is the single greatest vulnerability of generative models. And the technical solution the military proposes to completely solve this is a specific architecture known as Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RE.
Okay, I have heard the acronym RA thrown around a lot in tech circles. My understanding of standard AI, like the chatbots everyone uses on their phones right now, is that they are basically hyper-advanced autocomplete.
Pretty much.
They don't actually know facts. They just calculate the statistical probability of what word should logically come next based on the billions of pages of internet text they ingested. Is that right?
That is exactly right. They are probabilistic guessers, which is exactly why they hallucinate. They are designed to sound perfectly plausible, not to be factually truthful. Our array fundamentally alters that mechanic. It essentially handcuffs the language model to prevent it from guessing. In a sugared pipeline, the military enforces a strict four-step bounded model: curate, retrieve, cite, audit.
Okay, curate, retrieve, cite, audit. Walk me through exactly how a piece of data moves through those 4 steps. Let's start with curate.
First, curate. The military does not let the AI connect to the open internet, ever. Instead, they build a closed, highly secure, deeply curated vector database. This knowledge base contains only authoritative, validated military doctrine, official policy, and verified classified intelligence.
So step 1 is locking the AI in a library where every single book has been meticulously fact-checked by the Pentagon.
Yes, it can only read what they give it. Second is retrieve. When an officer asks the system a question, say, what is the doctrinal procedure for a medical evacuation in a contested urban environment? The language model is not allowed to just generate an answer based on its probabilistic training weights.
It can't guess.
It can't guess. Instead, a retrieval mechanism searches that curated database, finds the exact relevant paragraphs from the official manuals, and pulls them out.
It's like giving the AI an open book test, but aggressively restricting which textbook it is allowed to open.
Exactly. Then, and only then, the language model is simply used to synthesize and summarize that retrieved text into a readable, coherent answer for the officer.
Brilliant. Okay, what about step 3? Cite.
Third, cite. The system is explicitly programmed so that it must provide a citation for every claim. It must cite the exact manual, chapter, and page number, or the specific intelligence report that it used to formulate the answer.
And that solves the traceability problem we were talking about earlier. It completely breaks the black box. Because if the AI says, you must use 3 helicopters for the evacuation, I don't just have to trust the programmer's invisible hand.
No, you don't.
I can click the citation, open the underlying source document, and verify with my own eyes that it pulled that requirement directly from a 2024 Army Medical Doctor manual. I can see the math.
It securely grounds the generative AI in institutional truth. And finally, the fourth step, audit.
The accountability step.
Exactly. The entire workflow, the officer's initial prompt, the specific documents the system retrieved, the final output, and whether the human officer ultimately accepted or rejected that output, is logged in an immutable digital ledger.
So it can be reviewed later.
Reviewed later by commanders or by instructors in an educational setting to ensure compliance, accuracy, and accountability.
That is brilliant. Without a RBAG pipeline, the military simply cannot trust generative AI for high-stakes decisions.
Oh.
With a tightly controlled RBAG pipeline, the AI transforms from a risky, hallucinating chatbot into an incredibly powerful, fully auditable staff assistant.
It really is the technological bedrock that makes the rest of the educational framework possible.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. We have the grand philosophical vision, we have character science and epistemic discipline, we have the optimal task allocation, knowing who does what, we have the 3-tiered educational rebuild, the iterative wargaming, and the RBAG pipeline to anchor it all in truth.
A very comprehensive plan.
It is a beautiful, comprehensive plan on paper. But how on earth do you actually implement something this radical across a massive, notoriously slow-moving, bureaucratic behemoth like the Department of Defense?
Implementation is exactly where most grand technological strategies go to die.
Right.
The framework explicitly recognizes this institutional inertia and proposes a very specific mandated resource allocation formula to prevent the military from making a classic fatal mistake.
The 402-520-15 logic. I was fascinated by this breakdown in the text. Walk us through where the money is actually supposed to go and why it is divided exactly this way.
Historically, when a massive institution buys new technology, they spend about 90% of the budget on the software and hardware itself, buying the shiny objects.
Right.
And they spend almost nothing on preparing the human beings who actually have to use it. This framework radically flips that ratio. It mandates that only 40% of the budget should go to the technical infrastructure, building the RG platforms, buying the servers, licensing the models.
Which leaves a massive 60% of the budget for the human element. That is almost unheard of in defense spending.
It really is. 25% of the budget must be dedicated entirely to faculty and staff development. As we discussed earlier, if the instructors don't know how to supervise an AI workflow, they cannot teach the cadets.
If the teachers fail, the entire system collapses.
Precisely. Then 20% goes to curriculum design, the hard, grinding work of actually rewriting hundreds of courses to integrate these new multi-agent ecosystems and those whiteboard checkpoints we talked about.
And the final 15%.
The final 15% is dedicated entirely to evaluation and audit mechanisms to constantly measure if the system is actually working.
I can imagine the pushback on that from the old guard. A general saying, you want me to take a quarter of my AI modernization budget and spend it on seminars for professors? We need to buy more targeting algorithms.
Well, the pushback will be fierce.
But the framework is forcing the institution to realize that investing in the human capital required to wield the tool is just as important as the tool itself. But, if you have all these different war colleges, the Army War College, the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academies, how do you keep the standards consistent across all of them?
To solve that, the authors recommend the creation of a National PME Management Council. This would be a centralized, overarching governance body.
Dictating everything.
No, their job is not to dictate every single lesson plan, but to set the absolute baseline standards. They mandate the requirement for RAG pipelines across all branches. They enforce that Tier I literacy baseline, but they still allow the local flexibility of individual academies to teach the specific nuances of, say, sea power versus air power.
So what does this all mean? At the end of the day, how does the military actually know if this massive, incredibly expensive transformation is working? How do we measure success when the entire paradigm has shifted?
This raises an important question about metrics, specifically key performance indicators or KPIs. The text argues forcefully that the traditional educational metrics we have relied on for a century are entirely obsolete in the AI era.
They call them firepower metrics, right?
Yes, they refer to them dismissively as firepower metrics.
What exactly is a firepower metric in an educational context?
It's measuring volume and throughput, tracking basic attendance rates, measuring how many students graduated this year compared to last year, counting how many pages of strategic essays were produced by a class.
Right, and measuring the volume of written output is utterly meaningless when a student can prompt an AI to generate a 1,000-page, perfectly formatted strategy document in 45 seconds.
Exactly. High throughput simply no longer indicates high competence. Therefore, AI-ready military education must shift its entire assessment apparatus to measuring decision superiority.
But how do you empirically measure something as abstract as decision superiority?
You measure cognitive resilience under extreme stress. You put a student in a simulated command center. You deliberately feed them an AI-generated course of action that is incredibly persuasive, but contains a subtle, hidden, catastrophic error based on manipulated data.
A test of character.
Yes. And you measure. Does the student catch it? Can they function and reason clearly when the digital ecosystem is actively trying to deceive them? Can they accurately trace their source chains back to the RAG database?
Oh.
And most importantly, do they possess the intellectual courage to explicitly override the machine's recommendation, even when the clock is ticking and time is running out?
That is a profound, fundamental shift. It is measuring the integrity and resilience of the human mind rather than the speed of the typing or the volume of the memorization.
It is the only way to ensure that the human remains sovereign in the loop of consequence. The metric is judgment.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Let's try to summarize this massive, sprawling paradigm shift. What we've learned from this defense framework is that the dawn of the AI era does not make human reasoning obsolete. In fact, it does the exact opposite.
It makes it more vital than ever.
Right. In a world where data is infinite, where reality can be synthesized and faked for pennies, and where algorithms can predict standard behavior with terrifying accuracy, human reasoning, epistemic discipline, and pure character become the most critical, irreplaceable assets on the battlefield.
The entire goal of military education moving forward is not to teach humans how to compete with machines on data processing. You will lose that race.
Every time.
It is to use machines to carry that heavy, crushing burden of computation. Precisely so, the human mind is freed up and preserved to shoulder the moral, ethical, and strategic responsibility of command.
It is about optimizing the partnership, letting the AI sous chef do what the machine does best, relentlessly chopping the data, so the human head chef can do what only the human can do, taste the reality, bear the responsibility, and make the sovereign choice.
And doing all of it with absolute transparency, traceability, and auditable trust through systems like RAG.
I want to leave you, our listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. We've talked extensively today about cognitive resilience as the ultimate weapon. Now, imagine a future conflict, maybe 10 and 20 years from now, where both sides have achieved this vision.
Okay.
Both adversaries possess perfect, fully integrated, RAG-anchored, highly advanced multi-agent AI ecosystems. Both sides are using these incredibly powerful algorithms to predict and counter each other's moves flawlessly, operating at the absolute limits of mathematical logic.
A perfectly rational war.
Right. In a hyper-rational, mathematically perfect war, does the victor ultimately become the side whose human leaders possess the sheer intellectual courage to do the most wildly illogical, uncomputable, and unpredictable thing simply to break the enemy's algorithm?
It is the ultimate paradox of the technological age. The more we rely on perfect, deterministic logic machines to fight our wars, the more valuable human unpredictability, intuition, and sheer unprogrammable audacity might become.
It's something to think about the next time you ask an AI to draft an email, solve a complex problem at work, or summarize the news for you. Are you deliberately letting the machine carry the burden of the labor, or are you accidentally surrendering the responsibility of your own judgment? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the polished outputs, demand to see the cognitive math, and we will see you next time.